All right, welcome back. Another pretty busy day in the Dota world, as it usually is. I'm back here with another review, and on the fourth day of this week, we are still having some pretty stompy series. I know things usually level out a little bit with time, but it's looking like right now we have a clear definition of like which teams are ahead of some other ones. And I'm really, really excited for when these teams that stomped in this first week eventually meet in the coming weeks, just to see who ends up at the top of every division. Because again, a very lopsided series, so it's going to be interesting to see the battle of the Goliaths in every region here. For example, starting off with Boom versus OB Neon. Of course, Boom, they were supposed to be a team in the lower division this season, but by the fact that Omega got banned, and then now they're not banned anymore, but still Boom retains their upper division spot. They're now looking like one of the strongest teams in the region. I talked about this before in my prediction video, and again in this series against OB Neon, they really gave me no reason to doubt that. Of course, OB Neon, not exactly projected to be one of the strongest teams in the region, but they don't seem to struggle whatsoever in beating them here. Boom notably was running, again, something I've seen quite a lot these past few days watching all these games, a safe lane TA with a mid Ember Spirit. That seems to be a very common flex in the draft. So you pick this early Ember Spirit, you're not quite sure where he's going to lane, even picking an early Templar. People are playing it more in the safe lane now than they are mid. And you just have this nice mix of early DPS magic damage from the Ember Spirit, and just enough to make a lot of space for this Templar Assassin who, with the safe lane farm, with this hard carry farm prioritization, just hits this insane timing with the Desolator, just comes in with Blink Deso BKB at like 20 minutes in, and there's just no response for it. The amount of damage he's able to output is ridiculous. And yeah, this Boom and OB Neon series was no real different. It's kind of the same formula we've been seeing quite a bit. This game was actually pretty even to start, game one here. There was a lot of kill trading, especially in the mid lane, teams trying to make sure their tower's staying alive. It was an Ember Spirit versus Void Spirit mid matchup, so it's pretty common that there's going to be a lot of, back and forth trading. If it's not in the mid lane, it's going to be in one of the side lanes when one of them rotates and the other one counter initiates. But yeah, this is just a very good looking series for Boom. There was even one point where Tim's on the position 4, Weaver solo killed the PA at like 15 minutes in. It was just a rough game from OB Neon past that early game. And this game just kind of spiraled out of control quite quickly for Boom. So they take this one. They win that first one in just 26 minutes. So a very, very quick win. They got 37 kills in those 26 minutes. So quite impressive. Heading into game 2, things slowed down quite a bit. There was not nearly as much fighting early on. There was not as much trading. It was a lot of building pressure, though. So they seem to have their very clear roles. And hey, we're laning against this very aggressive lineup or an aggressive offlaner. We're just going to give up this tower, but we'll take their tower. It seemed like they were really dancing around each other around the map as opposed to clashing in the mid lane like they were before. But regardless, this was still a very, very good game for Boom. However, it didn't actually start off that way into heading into the mid game. OB Neon actually took a very, very impressive fight in Boom's jungle, and they end up getting a team wipe, stealing their ancient stack, and they end up picking up the Roshan. So OB Neon setting up, looking like, hey, they might be the underdog in this series, but they've got a lot of momentum on them right now. That is until they make the mistake that a lot of teams have been having lately when they have some sort of early lead, when they are an underdog team in this series, where they just kind of overextend or overstay their welcome a little bit, and a team as good as Boom is going to punish that, and they did. So this one slips out of the hands of OB Neon. It's a painful loss, but hopefully it's one that they can learn from. Yeah, again, it's just another case where Yopaj has way too much damage. They pick TA again. However, this time, again, it's Yopaj on the mid lane playing TA as opposed to the safe lane playing it. And he just does way too much damage. Eventually, OB Neon kind of runs out of steam. They had answers for him in the mid game, but once he started picking up a lot of items on the Templar, there was just no stopping him. And so I'm going to be giving my MVP to Yopaj here. I actually need to write the MVPs on the board because I completely forgot to do that. So in the magic of editing, they will be done in 3, 2, 1. Bam! And just like that, Yopaj is the MVP for that first series. Impressive win for Boom. They steal one from OB Neon. They stay composed in that second game. And yeah, for Neon, they got some work to do. Hopefully, they're hoping for the best for the next opponent here. Now moving on to Eastern Europe, of course, I'm going in order of which they are played. Starting off with just the upper division matches, we had Gambit versus Empire. Empire, not at all the same team that got into this upper division in the first place. Them, of course, coming from the lower division from finishing top 2. However, this is a brand new roster. The roster got pulled apart, picked apart by some higher tier teams, pulling players away. And then just that in combination of other players leaving. This is not the same Empire that got them to this upper bracket. And so heading into this, not only is Gambit one of the better teams in this region, but Empire looks a little weak. This was kind of a very, well, predictably, a very Gambit favored matchup. And Gambit has a very handily win. Starting off, their first game was actually very, very slow. Gambit was very patient with it. Kill-wise, there was not a lot going on. It was 6-1 at 18 minutes, sorry. So only 7 kills at 18 minutes in favor of Gambit. But Gambit was still leading regardless. And then eventually Gambit hit their timings. They know their timings very well. They're, again, one of the better teams in this region. They've taken some very, very impressive early team fightings. There were a lot of really nice blink calls from their offlaner, as well as some grips coming out from their support player, who his name escapes me right now for some reason, but he had himself a fantastic game with those grips. The enemy Shadow Fiend on Team Empire just had no game. Every time the Shadow Fiend even showed himself, had his BKB active. There was even an Oracle there to save the SF every single time, and yet these grips were just ruining his game. Every single team fight, this SF just had no chance. And yeah, this was a very, very impressive win for them. If it wasn't for the second game, I definitely would have given the MVP to the support player, just because of how fantastic it was in the first game. But in the second game, the most consistent player I find on Gambit was Alberca. He's on his Monkey King for both of these games. And he gets a double ultra kill in the first game. He has a fantastic record in the second game. Again, this is pretty much the same kind of core lineup. The Gambit's running 2 times in a row with the Death Prophet mid and the MK on the carry role. And the Death Prophet making a lot of nice early rotations, that being Lornoff. Just really opening the map in both games. He started off with really nice rotations on that Death Prophet, taking the early towers, knowing that he's the strongest hero on the map. And then it just makes space for Alberca, who again is playing this Monkey King. Eventually he hits his timing and he just comes in and he just owns. And this is one of the newer players. It's really nice to see him doing super well. Again, his total kill score throughout the entire series was 26, 3, and 21, which is ridiculous. He had himself a hell of a series. Again, a lot of members on Gambit had a very good series. Lornoff would be my runner-up. But for now, I'm giving this one to Alberca. So Gambit win these 2 series in roughly 35 minutes each, with a pretty convincing kill score as well. Gambit go up 1-0 on the season. As for Empire, you know, I can't say they necessarily played terribly. These weren't exactly stomps, but they definitely were outclassed playing against Gambit here. So best of luck in their next series. Now moving on to the other upper division match we had in Eastern Europe. We have Puk Champ versus Navi. Navi, probably the slightly favored team in this matchup. Puk Champ, still a pretty strong team. However, they didn't exactly make any changes in the offseason that really, you know, made me feel like I feel very excited for them. I still see them as kind of a middle-of-the-road team. Navi as well, but maybe slightly higher. However, Puk Champ completely proved me wrong. This was a very, very well-executed series for Puk Champ, I gotta say. I can't really tell if it was maybe Navi playing under par or Puk Champ just playing really, really well. Maybe a combination of both. But either way, this just was a pretty handily beatdown. It wasn't a stomp. It wasn't ugly or anything. It was just a very, very well-executed win from Puk Champ. Starting off, Puk Champ in both games ran the Razor IO safe lane dual lane, and it proved to be very effective. Navi had a very, very hard time bursting the Razor throughout the entire game. Typically, we've been seeing a lot of Razor throughout these past couple days. You know, he's been coming a lot into meta. You just itemize for some high ground siege at some point. You just get an Aghanim Scepter from Roche maybe, and a Refresher's Orb. And this Razor hero, who typically does not do super well in the late game, is all of a sudden buffed up immensely by an IO and is able to take your towers. And that's exactly what Puk Champ was doing. Navi, in game 1 notably, they were actually doing quite well. They attempt an early Roshan, and they just get interrupted at the most disastrous time. Roshan is almost dead. They get 2 of their cores caught in the pit at low HP, and they die right at the same time as Roshan does, and Puk Champ comes in and steals the Aegis. And from there, Navi it's kind of just over from there. They try and leave the base a few times, but every time they do, it just seems like Puk Champ is reading those movements and they catch them every time. It was a very slow, melodical closing of the map. Eventually, Navi can't leave, and Puk Champ secure themselves this win. They actually do overextend at one point when sieging the high ground. They dove even near the fountain. Navi sort of holds their high ground, but in the next fight, they have a rapier on their PA. It's still not enough for them to win. Puk Champ just comes in and cleans up the fight that they likely should have just ended the game that first time around. But regardless, they get the win. They win that one in just over 40 minutes with a kill score of 30-13, so pretty convincing. And the second game was even more handily. It was even more handily done by Puk Champ again. Like Navi just was really struggling to find an opening. They had the IO Razor lane once again, so you can't exactly burst either of those heroes. They've got a lot of heals behind them. And then in the off lane this time, they've got a Beastmaster. And this Beastmaster is putting a lot of pressure on them all the time, and there's just really no opening for Navi throughout this entire game. Every single time they try and go in, and even sometimes fights would look really, really good for Navi. You know, they get a nice pickup, they get a nice initiation in, and the fight looks like it should really go Navi's way, and then all of a sudden, 3 heroes are dead in Navi, and only like 1 or 2 are dead on Puk Champ. Fights were just not going Navi's way, despite the fact that they always started pretty well. There was even one point where Navi looked a little desperate. They were down 2 heroes already on the retreat. They were pretty much in the clear, and then their Tidehunter blinks in 3v5 and just gets a 5-man Ravage, but there's no follow-up. It just seemed really, really weird. Navi not very coordinated in this game. And yeah, again, it's a very good game on the side of Puk Champ. My MVP for this one, I got to give it to Ducalis, playing the IO both games. Again, I think he was a very big part in the fact that, or in why Navi really struggled. He was just always there with the saves at the right time. He was always buffing up his Razor, made it impossible to kill him. And again, fantastic series for him. And for Puk Champ, I'm expecting the teams are going to start banning this IO or this Razor in the first phase next time. I don't think anyone's going to be maybe as easygoing as Navi was in that second game. Because again, Navi let the Razor and the IO in the first phase both games. So who knows? And now ending off our upper division matches, we head over to South America, where we actually have our upper division debut. We start things off with Thunder Predator versus Infamous. Thunder Predator, of course, consisting mainly of that old no-ping roster that finished at the top of the DPC last tour in South America. Unfortunately, they didn't quite qualify for TI. They were still quite far off when it comes to points as well, but still a strong roster nonetheless. And yeah, this was a very good series from this roster. I gotta say, Infamous, not exactly one of the strongest teams in this division. They did put up a pretty good fight in game 1, notably. But, oh man, Infamous, the drafts were really, I think, Infamous's downfall. I think they played pretty well. They just really shot themselves in the foot with their drafts. Game 1, they drafted, it felt like their entire draft was completely reactionary to what Thunder Predator was picking. They had a Slark mid in response to the Batrider, who still didn't exactly crush his lane, didn't exactly have a good game. They had a Faceless Void carry that they last picked, but the rest of their team consisted of Brewmaster, Rubik, and a Gyro 5. With a Slark mid, there's no damage going into that Chrono, and that's what we saw a lot of the game. He would get these big Chronospheres, and there was just no follow-up damage. And yeah, Infamous really just had no chance in this game. They had so much anti-synergy. Having a Slark and a Faceless Void on the same team, unless you're chronoing a guy right on the edge, Slark's not going to be able to do anything, and then all your damage that you can throw in is maybe a Gyro Call Down and a Rubik Fade Bolt. Like, there was really nothing here, so this was a pretty easy win for Thunder Predator. And in Game 2, Thunder Predator, I thought, themselves didn't exactly have the best draft. This was just a beatdown of a game. Thunder Predator's draft didn't exactly have any crazy synergy. They didn't have like the best looking like team fight looking spells. This was just one team just clobbering the other one down, regardless of what their draft was. Thunder Predator just being the better team in this series here. It was kind of an ugly game, gotta say, but Thunder Predator come away with the win. Both of them in around 30 minutes, and a pretty big kill score for Thunder Predator. They pick up 64 kills in a 63-minute long series, while Infamous only picks up 23 kills along the whole thing. So yeah, Thunder Predator pretty excited with the start. They go up 1-0. Infamous, they definitely have some work to do, especially on the drafting side of things. That Game 1 draft being entirely reactionary, definitely not what you want to be seeing from a team in the upper division. So we'll have to see how that goes. Now moving into Southeast Asia to start our lower division matches, of which we had 5 today. 2 of them being in the lower division, and starting off with Lil Gun and Interactive Philippines. Lil Gun coming in from the upper division, getting relegated after finishing bottom 2, while Interactive Philippines are coming into this as a new team, coming in from the open qualifiers. It took them 3 tries, but they did make it. And right away, Lil Gun drafts in the first phase, let alone the end of the first phase, so I will give that to Interactive Philippines. But they first phase of Broodmother, which is not something we've seen a lot since the nerfs back around after the Anime Major, when Broodmother was getting picked pretty much every game. And if it wasn't getting picked, it was because it was banned. And this was a very, very difficult Brood game. Not only just because they picked it in the first phase doesn't mean it got countered strictly after that. Even the first heroes that they picked the Brood into were very good Brood counters. The lineup in question is Tidehunter, who can pretty much tank Spiderlings with his passive and his Kraken and his Anchor Smash. Has no problem tanking spiders. Ember Spirit, who when he builds a Maelstrom has just generally a lot of AoE damage and with a single Sleight of Fist can clear out all your spiders. We have Grimstroke, who with a single Stroke of Fate can almost even one-shot Broodmothers if she has enough spiders, let alone just kill all of her spiders in general. Timbersaw, who is another hero like Tidehunter, who just doesn't die to the Spiderlings just because of the fact that it just builds up all of his armor. That in combination with all of his AoE spells makes it very difficult. And then Monkey King, who has a big AoE stun to set up for the Broodmother kills. This looks like an impossible draft to play Broodmother into. And yet, he goes, this is 423, he ends up 14, 1, and 12 by the end of this game on his Broodmother. This was insane. He is a Grandmaster Broodmother, so obviously he's got a lot of experience, but playing at this level against this many counters, this was a very impressive win for them. It was a Broodmother win, so not exactly a whole lot having to be done by the rest of the team, but they did still play very well. They were making all the right movements around the map, getting very good pickoffs. The Broodmother playing very active despite being a Broodmother. And yeah, this was just a super impressive game on the side of Lilgun, specifically 423 on his Broodmother. Fantastic. And so heading into game 2, what do you know? There's a first phase ban on the Broodmother coming out from Interactive Philippines. You can't let that go through once again, especially when you had such a good lineup against the Brood and you still couldn't beat it. Game 2 featured a lot of early fighting. It was pretty exciting at the start. Lilgun was slightly pulling ahead though with some wins. Notably, they had their 423 as their safe lane player. However, when he picked Brood, he did play mid in that game. But when he was playing Faceless Void in the second game, there was at one point where he was like in between the tier 1 and tier 2 in the mid lane, surrounded by like 3 heroes, and he had like 200 HP left, and his teammates bought him just enough time to time walk out, save his own ass, and instead he time walks even deeper and kills the enemy Terrorblade and then dies. Like, the balls on this guy. I gotta say, I'm a real big fan of 423 in this series here. And yeah, again, this was just another case of a beatdown. Past this early point in the game when there was a lot of fighting and trading going on, this ended up just being a real beatdown on the side of Lilgun. They end up winning that one in even less time than they did in their Broodmother game in just over 29 minutes, with a kill score of 42-15. So Lilgun showing why they were one of the upper division teams, not exactly one of the better upper division teams, actually the worst one from last tour. But regardless, an upper division team that is looking to get back up there as soon as possible. So, good start for Lilgun. As for Interactive Philippines, again, one of the newer teams here, one of the newer rosters. They actually only assembled their roster just a few days before the qualifiers, if I'm not mistaken. So, they've got some work to do, but again, yeah, this was just a better team handling a newer team for sure. So my MVP goes to 423. Again, his Broodmother game was insane. His Faceless Void performance was ballsy as all hell. I can't really not give it to him. Although, honorable mention to 11. He played Mars in both games, and he was just hitting some crazy spears the whole time. It was really hard not to give it to 11, but when 423 was playing just as well as he was, I can't not give it to him. So there you go. Next up, moving on to Talon versus Polaris. So Talon, with their debut in the DPC, they of course needed 2 tries to make it in through those qualifiers, but they still made it, and they looked good in their first game. Even though this was the only 3-game series of the day, this was not necessarily a close series where the games weren't exactly the most entertaining, the most thrilling. These were kind of just stomps one after the other, but Talon did get off to a pretty good start. I mean, they win the first game, before I get into it here, 25-5, which is pretty ridiculous in under 30 minutes, a very stompy game. This game was actually pretty close near the start until it just wasn't. There's not really much else I can really say about that. Polaris just kind of crumbled under the first Roshan that Talon able to get. Again, Talon slightly leading in that early game. They get themselves the first Aegis, and Polaris just kind of crumbled under it. They just weren't really able to keep up from there, and from there, Talon just snowballed themselves for the first win of the series. In game 2, we saw Gabby playing Terrorblade once again, this time against a Phantom Assassin, which is, I wouldn't say necessarily a favorite matchup either way. Terrorblade has a hard time killing PA because of the evasion, but PA has a really hard time killing Terrorblade at times because of how high his armor is. But regardless, this was just a really, really well-played game by Polaris. Gabby, as opposed to the first game, was just not really given any space. It seemed like every single time he showed his hero in a fight or in a lane when he was farming, he would just get ganked and would get killed by a few heroes. And this was another game that was pretty brawly near the start, kind of close, back and forth trading. And Talon, just in general, was kind of overextending quite a bit. They were kind of overstaying their welcome a little bit. I think they were just assuming they were stronger than they really were when they were trying to push some early towers. and Polaris just took full advantage of this. And when the mid game started rolling around, bigger team fights started happening, bigger items started happening. Talon actually had pretty nice jumps on early fights. They would have really good initiations, and still, despite that, they just weren't really able to clean up the rest of the fight. Despite the fact that they would start with 1 or 2 pickoffs, the fights always went Polaris's way. And so Talon, this game was starting to slowly slip away from them. And once Polaris gets that first Aegis, they're able to get pickoffs and pickoffs everywhere. Again, Gabby unable to show anywhere really. And Talon just ends up getting locked in their base. And yeah, Polaris with a nice clean win. So now, 2 games deep into the series, we're tied 1-1. Both games have been pretty stompy. What's this third game going to look like? Well, unfortunately, if you're a Talon fan, not good for Talon. Talon was getting ran at quite a bit very early. Polaris was running a Undying support, so they were just constantly swatting this Tombstone, just diving the early towers. And there was really no response for the Natsumi Medusa. His Medusa was pretty unkillable, especially behind that Undying, who was just always providing the heals and just running at the heroes that were trying to kill her. And yeah, fantastic game for Polaris. Again, Talon really struggling in the back half of the series. Started strong. Looked like they just really couldn't get their foothold after that first game, though. My MVP has to go to Lilich. On the mid lane, he played the Mars in the first game, which notably was a rougher game. Again, Talon very, very dominant in that first game. But the next few games, when he played his Leshrac and his DP, I loved his rotations. I loved his team fights. He was a very, 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 very big part of them, making nice early rotations to those towers, taking them early. And yeah, all around, great series for Lilich. And for Talon, kind of a disappointing start. I think a lot of people were really expecting this team to sweep through this bottom division. I mean, they've got the roster, the names on the roster to really get through this series, but I mean this division, but they've notably been weak when people maybe are overrating how new these guys are. You know, these guys still are a very new team, even though they have a lot of big name players. They haven't played together before. Might need a little bit more time than people are expecting. Next up, now moving to Eastern Europe now, where we have just one series in the lower division. We have the CIS Rejects making their debut, that of course being the stack featuring Roger, Pasha, Ramses, FNG, and one more whose name escapes me all the time. I can't believe I can't remember the last member. But yeah, this was a fantastic series against Namiga. Namiga, of course, being a team that's been in this division before. CIS Rejects came in through the qualifiers, consisting of a lot of tier 1 players that just didn't get picked up through the post-TI roster shuffle period. So they're a team that should be bound for this upper division, but again, could be the case of some other teams like maybe Elephant or Talon, where just because they're a bunch of big name players, they won't necessarily do super well. But they do start off on the right foot. They win this series 2-0, and this was a very, very long series. Game 1 in specific was just 2 core lineups that just couldn't hit buildings confidently. On the side of Namiga, we have a Timbersaw, a CK carry, and then a Beastmaster mid with Aghanims. So it's not like a Helmdom Beastmaster that's going to be able to run over towers. It's a magic build, team fight oriented Beastmaster. And then on the side of Rejects, we have Kunkka playing carry, we have a Tinker, and we have a Magnus playing in the offlane. So a lot of team fight, a lot of split push, but no one that really kills buildings directly. And for the most part of this game, Namiga was actually leading, but it's the late game team fights that actually end up biting them in the butt when they end up dying with no buyback very, very late into the game. And even though they don't have the best pushing heroes on CIS Rejects, they still take this game because obviously if there's no heroes alive, bases tend to be easier to take. That's just kind of how it works. If you want a really fun, long game to watch, I'd recommend this one. It is a little tedious, again, because there's no real objective-taking heroes. But regardless, there was a lot of back and forth, and fun game nonetheless. Game 2, there was a lot of early fighting. Kind of the same as game 1 a little bit. I mean, just 24 minutes in, there were already 33 kills. Namiga was actually leading in kills throughout this entire game, despite the fact that they don't end up winning it. For the first little while of the game, specifically in the mid-game, Ramses on the Medusa, again, there was no real response from Namiga for this Medusa until closer to the late game, but by that point, the rest of the team of CIS Rejects was just strong enough to take some fights. It was actually a pretty close late game, but FNG had some really nice grips. So again, Bane today, another hero that was getting picked up, and when it was looking quite good. And again, this is another game where in the late game, Namiga just kind of gets beat out in the no buyback game. And CIS Rejects, they take this one. It wasn't a super convincing win, but considering how new this team is, again, and the fact that Namiga has been in this DPC for quite a while now, I'd say this is a very, very good note to start on for CIS Rejects. My MVP goes to FNG. Again, his Bane. He played it both games. He died a lot. He was tanking a lot of ganks throughout these games, and specifically with how long these games were. Of course, as a support, you're going to die a lot. But when he was in those team fights, he would die maybe, he would buy back, and he'd hit this nice grip. And gotta say, FNG, his positioning after those initial deaths every now and then was pretty fantastic. So gotta give him the MVP there. Now moving on to our last two series, both from South America. So again, South America having quite a few games today. Starting off with Enteritus versus Inverse. Enteritus just kind of handled Inverse throughout the series. The series was never really all that close. One thing I will say about Enteritus is they were really, really good at baiting Inverse in just a little bit too far and then just jumping on them, getting these really nice pickoffs and initiations to start fights the way they really wanted to. And just because of that, just off of that in game one, they were able to pull ahead very nicely. And what was a close game to start in game one just ended up being a stomp. Enteritus, just a fantastic game one. They win that one in just over 35 minutes, 29-18 score. So it was still pretty close in that early game, but it was those mid to late game team fights that Enteritus just really had those nice executions of the beginning of. Game two, and this was just a stomp. This was just kind of ugly. There was like no opportunity for Inverse. It looked like there was no openings, similar to the Navi Puk Champ game two earlier I was talking about. But man, they just couldn't hold on to this game. My MVP goes to Rayer. He played Kunkka and Queen of Pain, both mid. And he stomped a lane in that Queen of Pain game so hard. I gotta say, all the cores on the Enteritus played quite well, but I thought he played the most exceptional out of everyone on the team. Again, he was just stomping his lane in game two, and gotta give him props for that. Finally, ending things off, we have Gorilla Pride versus Omega, not to be confused with the Omega or Smart Omega, who got banned in Southeast Asia and then unbanned, like I mentioned earlier. Gorilla Pride, they actually had a very convincing start. I thought their carry player now had really, really good map awareness. There were a few times when Omega was trying to gank him in the jungle under either a smoke or an invis rune, and without even having directly seen them, he was able to read the rotations, move out of the way in time. And it was super nice. And just as I was thinking, you know, wow, they've got this really good carry player, things started falling apart very quickly for Gorilla Pride as the Mengati Bloodseeker on the side of Omega was just cleaning up these mid-game fights. He was just destroying. But things ended up slipping away from Omega despite the fact that they had this insanely strong Bloodseeker who was just cleaning up in every team fight. And I think the thing that really bit them in the ass was his itemization. Rather than going for an MKB against the PA or some sort of damage item or something like that, he opted for a Gleipnir, a lot more utility, which his team really didn't need. I know he had an Ember Spirit on his team who was already setting up a lot of kills for him. And this ends up, I think, in my opinion, being what bit them in the ass, as he just sort of ran out of damage for this PA. The PA eventually was starting to get too many items where she would get a Lincoln Sphere on her from her teammates, so she couldn't get ruptured anymore. And eventually there was just no more damage to kill this PA. So all around, I think Omega kind of just beat themselves there. Not to take anything away from Gorilla Pride, I think they also played a pretty good game. Again, specifically now on the carry position, I thought he played pretty fantastic. In game two, this was, again, so this is another instance of a team having a really good start in game one, things slip away, and then they just don't come back into the series after, because this second game was just a complete non-starter for Omega. They drafted a last pick Storm Spirit into a Lina mid, and it's like, okay, so you're anticipating your Storm to have a rough lane, but you want the Storm Spirit for the game. You think he's going to have what you need in the mid game, in the late game, for the itemization, all that. But then they proceeded to lose every single lane in just the like roughest matchups ever. There was just no opportunity. By the time they actually got their items on their mid Storm Spirit, like the Ursa had an Aegis already. It was just pretty over, and so Omega lose this one 2-0. They dropped to 0-1 in the season. Again, this was their debut. And for Gorilla Pride, they look pretty good. Again, they made a nice little comeback in game one. Whether or not that was them being good or Omega just kind of shooting themselves in the foot, who knows? But my MVP does go to Now. Again, I really was impressed with his map awareness and his just overall gameplay here. He plays PA in game one, Ursa in game two. He goes 12-2 and 6 in game one. He goes 22-2 and 5 in game two. So fantastic series for him. Thank you guys so much for watching. Feel free to join our Discord channel like I have written here. I have a few matches here in my tomorrow's hype box. These are all pretty much just upper division matches, as I'm not really as excited for any of the lower division matches happening tomorrow. None of them that are really jumping out at me. But we do have Team Spirit making their debut since, of course, the end of TI. And not only are they making their debut, but they're also playing against one of the higher projected teams in the region, Team Unique, anticipated to do quite well this season. We have No Ping versus Hokori, which is some teams that I think have a lot of potential to do